Victorian bakers cooked up death with every loaf. They worked in sweltering underground caverns, breathing coal dust and flour for 18-hour shifts, and still had to walk for miles delivering bread afterward. The average baker died at 42 years old, and yet, without them, Victorian Britain's Industrial Revolution would have collapsed from hunger. It makes you wonder, how did anyone survive making the very thing that kept everyone else alive? So yeah, if these stories work for you, subscribe. And I'm curious, what time is it where you are? Comment below. Last week, someone from Canada said they listened during lunch breaks. Not judging, just wasn't expecting that. Okay, tonight it's Victorian bakeries in the 1870s. But before we go anywhere, get cozy. Like, actually cozy. Pillows good? Blanket situation handled? Perfect. Trust me on this one. So congratulations, you just woke up in a Victorian bakehouse in Birmingham, 1875. It's 11 o'clock at night and your day is just beginning. The tiny underground room is lit by a single flickering gas lamp casting long shadows across walls stained black with decades of coal soot. The air feels thick enough to chew, a mix of damp heat and flour dust that coats your lungs with every breath. Not like the clean air flowing through your bedroom right now. Your back aches from sleeping on a thin sack of flour thrown over wooden boards, your makeshift bed for the 2-hour nap you managed between shifts. Your mouth tastes of yesterday's coal dust, your eyes sting, and your hands are cracked and bleeding from handling scorching hot trays and harsh lye soap. Welcome to the life of a Victorian journeyman baker, a job considered more deadly than working in the mines. The foreman, a burly man with forearms like Christmas hams, is already shouting orders as 3 other bleary-eyed men stumble into the bakehouse. Swift, Foster, get that bloody oven lit. Harpreet, start the sponge. New boy, haul those sacks. He points at you with a finger missing its top joint. Lost to a bread peel years ago. 20 stone of flour tonight. The factories need double for morning shift. 20 stone. That's 280 pounds of flour you'll be kneading by hand before dawn. For a moment you consider running, but where would you go? In 1875, losing your position means starvation or the workhouse. Neither option is appealing, so instead you shuffle toward the corner where massive burlap sacks of flour are stacked against the wall. "Bloody hell, it's freezing in here," mutters a skinny young man with hollow cheeks as he struggles to light the coal-fired oven. "Just wait," replies the older baker beside him. "In an hour you'll be sweating like a sinner in church." He's not wrong. Victorian bakehouses were cruel masterpieces of thermal torture, freezing cold when you arrived but soon transformed into sweltering chambers that routinely reached over 100 degrees Fahrenheit. The coal-fired ovens radiated heat into spaces with no ventilation, creating conditions that would violate every modern workplace safety law. "Move it," the foreman cracks a towel near your ear. "Those sacks won't walk themselves." You heave the first sack onto your shoulder, knees buckling under the weight. It feels like carrying a small child, a very dense, very heavy small child made of finely milled wheat. The rough burlap scratches your neck as you stagger across the room and drop it beside the massive wooden kneading trough. Flour puffs up in a cloud, settling on your face and hair. By morning, you'll look like you've aged 50 years, dusted white like some ghoulish spectre. The skinny baker, you learn his name is Duncan, has managed to get the fire roaring. The orange glow illuminates his face, showing eyes red-rimmed from lack of sleep and the perpetual flour dust. He's maybe 25, but looks 40. "How long you been baking?" he asks, not looking away from the flames. 3 months, you reply, returning for another sack. "Won't make it to Christmas," he says flatly. "Most don't." He wasn't being cruel, just stating facts. The statistics were brutal. In the 1870s, a baker's average life expectancy was just 42 years if they survived apprenticeship. Lung diseases from flour dust, burns, physical exhaustion, and injuries from heavy lifting took a devastating toll. The combination of sleep deprivation and dangerous equipment created a recipe for disaster that claimed countless lives. "Right, you lazy bastards," the foreman claps his hands. "Sponge needs starting now if we're to meet morning deliveries." The sponge was the first stage in bread making, a mixture of flour, water, and yeast left to ferment before being made into dough. In better bakeries, the foreman would have come in earlier to set this up. In this Birmingham bakehouse, like most urban establishments, cutting corners was standard practice. Harpreet, a bearded man with powerful shoulders, dumps yeast into a smaller trough, then adds water and a portion of flour. "American flour tonight," he grunts. "Shipped in from the bloody colonies, makes for a stronger dough but hell on the arms." By the 1870s, British bakeries were increasingly reliant on imported American wheat. Cheaper and with higher gluten content, it produced stretchier dough, good for bread, punishing to mix by hand. American wheat fields and British railways had combined to transform baking from a local craft to an industrial process. Not that the technology had reached most bakehouses yet. The coal fire's heat begins to permeate the room as you finish hauling the last of the flour sacks. Already sweat trickles down your spine, soaking the rough cotton shirt. There's no rest though. Immediately you're set to sifting flour, pushing it through wire mesh to remove debris. In the flickering light, you occasionally spot weevils, small stones, or unidentifiable dark specks that you quietly flick away. "What's that you're pitching?" The foreman appears suddenly at your shoulder. "Just some bugs," you stammer. He laughs, a harsh barking sound. "Bugs? Boy, that's just extra protein. During the cotton famine, we'd have killed for weevils. Adds flavour." This wasn't exaggeration. Food purity was a foreign concept in many Victorian bakeries. When profit margins were razor-thin and competition brutal, nothing went to waste. The notion that customers might object to insects in their bread was seen as laughably squeamish. As the night deepens, the real work begins. The sponge has fermented, bubbling with yeast activity, and now it's time to mix the main dough. This is when you discover what true physical labour means. The four of you gather around the massive wooden trough, a vessel that looks like a giant coffin, as Harpreet pours in the sponge. Then comes the rest of the flour, more water and salt. "Get in there and mix," orders the foreman. Literally, in many Victorian bakeries, including this one, bakers used their bare feet to mix dough when quantities were large. You and Duncan kick off your boots, roll up your trousers, and climb into the trough. The cool, sticky dough squishes between your toes as you begin walking through it, pushing and turning the mass. It's oddly satisfying at first, like stomping in mud puddles as a child. 20 minutes later, satisfaction has given way to exhaustion. Your calves burn with the effort of moving through the increasingly stiff dough. Sweat pours down your face, dripping into the mixture below. No one comments on this. Baker's sweat in bread was so common that Victorian food writer Eliza Acton specifically mentioned the torrents of perspiration that inevitably ended up in each loaf. "Enough," calls the foreman eventually. "Get it on the bench for kneading." This is when the real punishment begins. The dough, now a cohesive mass weighing over 300 pounds, must be pulled from the trough and divided for hand kneading. Each baker takes a portion weighing about 50 pounds, heaving it onto floured wooden benches along the wall. Kneading dough is an art. It's also, when done on this scale, brutally physical work. You push with your palms, fold the dough, turn it, and repeat thousands of times. Your shoulders scream in protest. Blisters form, then pop on your palms. The dough sticks to your hands, pulling at your skin with each movement. "Put your back into it, lad," shouts the foreman. "That gluten won't develop itself." The science of gluten development wasn't fully understood in the 1870s, but bakers knew that proper kneading created better bread. They just didn't have machines to do the work. Instead, human muscle power transformed flour and water into the elastic dough that would eventually become crusty loaves. After an hour of kneading, your arms feel like overcooked pudding. Every muscle trembles with fatigue. But there's no rest. The clock is ticking toward morning deliveries. The dough is divided again, this time into 4-pound lumps that will become standard loaves. "Shape 'em quick," barks the foreman. "First batch needs to be in the oven in 10 minutes. This is where skill matters more than strength. Your fingers, despite their fatigue, must form each lump into a tight ball, creating surface tension that will help the bread rise properly. It's delicate work done at breakneck speed. Any loaf shaped poorly will bake into a misshapen mess and come out of your wages. By 2 a.m., the bakehouse has reached its full infernal potential. The temperature hovers around 95 degrees Fahrenheit. The air is a thick soup of flour dust, coal smoke, and sweat. Every breath feels like drinking hot soup. Your shirt is plastered to your back, completely soaked through. Duncan, working beside you, suddenly sways on his feet. Before anyone can react, he crumples to the floor like a puppet with cut strings. "Not again," sighs Harpreet, barely looking up from his shaping. "Drag him to the corner," orders the foreman. "Splash some water on him. We can't fall behind." This wasn't uncommon. Heat exhaustion and fainting were regular occurrences in Victorian bakehouses. With no ventilation, workers frequently collapsed from the combination of heat, exertion, and the carbon monoxide from coal fires. Some never woke up. You help Harpreet move Duncan to a slightly cooler corner where a splash of water from a bucket brings him around. His eyes flutter open, unfocused at first. "How long was I out?" he mumbles. 2 minutes, replies Harpreet. "New record for staying on your feet, though. Made it till 2 this time." Duncan staggers upright, still wobbly. "Can't afford to rest. Got a sister and her kids depending on me." The brutal economics of Victorian baking meant there was no sick leave, no workers' compensation. If you didn't work, you didn't get paid. And in the 1870s, a baker's weekly wage of perhaps 20 shillings was barely enough to keep a family fed. Missing even a single shift could mean hunger. Back at the shaping bench, the first batches of dough have risen enough to go into the oven. This brings a new danger, the massive wooden peel, a flat shovel-like tool used to place loaves in the blazing hot oven. "Watch yourself," warns Harpreet as the foreman slides the first batch in. "Old Bill lost 3 fingers on that peel last year, crushed them between the handle and the oven arch." Workplace accidents were so common in Victorian bakeries that most workers bore scars or missing digits. With no safety regulations and exhausted workers handling dangerous equipment in poorly lit conditions, injuries were inevitable. Burns from the 500-degree oven were particularly common and could easily become infected in the unsanitary conditions. By 3 a.m, the first loaves are coming out of the oven, crusty golden brown oblongs that release a tantalizing aroma as they're stacked on cooling racks. The smell momentarily makes your exhaustion worthwhile. There's something primal and satisfying about transforming simple ingredients into food. "Don't get too attached," says Harpreet, noticing your admiration. "These ain't for folk like us. Factory workers get these. 6pence a loaf." He's right. Though you're making the staff of life as a baker in 1870s Birmingham, you could barely afford to buy what you produced. Most bakers lived on damaged loaves, stale returns, or the cheapest brown bread, ironically healthier than the white bread prized by wealthier Victorians, though no one knew it then. The night grinds on. Batch after batch is shaped, risen, baked and cooled. Your world narrows to a cycle of burning heat, aching muscles, and the endless demands of the clock. There's no conversation now. Everyone is too exhausted to speak. Communication happens in grunts and gestures. Around 4 a.m., the foreman announces a brief rest while the final batch proves. 20 minutes, he says, not a second more. This is the baker's pitch, a short sleep taken on whatever surface is available. You collapse onto a pile of empty flour sacks thrown over the kneading trough, not caring about the hard wood beneath. Duncan and Harpreet do the same, falling asleep almost instantly. The foreman remains awake, watching the clock with bloodshot eyes. Sleep comes like a hammer blow, deep and instant. Your dreams are confused, falling into vast troughs of dough, suffocating under mountains of flour. It feels like you've barely closed your eyes when rough hands shake you awake. Up, final batch needs loading. Your body screams in protest as you force yourself upright. Every joint feels filled with ground glass. Your hands are swollen, blistered in places, cracked and bleeding in others, but there's no time for self-pity. The rhythm of the bakehouse waits for no one. The eastern sky is beginning to lighten as the final loaves come out of the oven, but the workday is far from over. Now comes the delivery, loading baskets, carts and wagons with fresh bread to be distributed throughout the city before breakfast. "New boy takes the factory route today," announces the foreman. 30 loaves, Soho works. They start at 6 sharp, be late and we lose the contract. Your heart sinks. The Soho Works is nearly 3 miles away, and you'll be carrying a basket weighing almost 100 pounds. After a night of labour that would break most modern workers, you now face an urban hike with a crushing load. "Better get moving," says Harpreet sympathetically. "Factory route's the worst. Take Bridge Street. Less chance of the street Arabs nicking a loaf." Street Arabs was Victorian slang for homeless children who would sometimes steal food from delivery boys. You couldn't really blame them. Hunger was a constant companion for many in industrial Birmingham, but a stolen loaf would come out of your already meagre wages. As you load your delivery basket, Duncan appears beside you, face grey with exhaustion but eyes surprisingly kind. "Here," he says quietly, slipping a small loaf into your pocket. "For the road. You'll need it." This small act of kindness, sharing food in a world of scarcity, was how many Victorian workers survived. Despite brutal competition, bakers often formed tight bonds, looking out for each other in a system designed to grind them down. Outside, the pre-dawn air feels shockingly cool after the inferno of the bakehouse. Your sweat-soaked clothes instantly chill you to the bone, but the heavy basket on your back will soon have you overheating again. The streets are not yet fully awake. A few early workers, night soil men finishing their rounds, the occasional police constable eyeing you suspiciously. This was the baker's twilight world, working while others slept, delivering the day's bread as the city slowly stirred to life. As you trudge toward the factory district, the weight of the basket already making your shoulders burn, you reflect on the brutal irony of your situation. Without you and thousands like you, Victorian Britain would starve. The Industrial Revolution, with its factories and mines, ran on the energy provided by bread. Yet those who made this essential food were among the most abused workers in the empire, broken by exhaustion, disease and poverty. The average baker in 1875 would be dead before age 45, having spent a life in underground rooms breathing flour dust and coal smoke. The rising sun catches on factory chimneys ahead as you adjust your heavy load. Another day in Victorian Birmingham begins. For you, it's already halfway done. Tonight, you'll do it all again, and the next night, and the next. Such was the life of a Victorian baker, making the food that fed a nation, one exhausting loaf at a time. As the sun breaks over the horizon, painting the smoke-stained buildings in golden light, you find yourself wondering how long you'll survive in this profession that devours its own. The statistics aren't encouraging, but then again, someone has to beat the odds. Maybe it will be you. Or maybe, like so many others, you'll become just another casualty of the Victorian bakehouse. Forgotten by history, your life spent feeding others until it burned away like flour in a too-hot oven. The factory whistle at Soho Works pierces the morning air, calling workers to their stations. You quicken your pace despite screaming muscles. Bread must be delivered. The great machine of industrial Britain must be fed. And tomorrow it all begins again in the sweltering flour-dusted darkness of 11 p.m. The workers at Soho Works swarm around you like hungry ants as you set down your basket of bread. 30 men in soot-stained clothes, their faces already streaked with factory grime despite the early hour, hands outstretched with coins. These are the lucky ones, factory workers with steady wages enough to afford a fresh loaf each day. "Back up, you animals," shouts the factory foreman, a whip-thin man with a magnificent moustache. "Form a bloody queue or none of you eats." They shuffle into a ragged line, eyeing the bread with naked hunger. The average factory worker in 1870s Birmingham burned through thousands of calories daily, working 12-hour shifts at punishing physical labour. Bread wasn't just food, it was fuel, the coal that kept human machines running. "4 pence, you say to the first man, holding out a crusty loaf. He drops the coins into your palm without a word, snatches the bread, and immediately tears off a chunk with his teeth. By the time he walks away, half the loaf is gone. One by one, they pay and take their bread. Some wrap it carefully in cloth, saving it for later. Others devour it on the spot, cramming huge mouthfuls between cracked lips. The bond between these men and bread is primal. Nothing fancy, no delicate appreciation of crust or crumb, just desperate need. "You're new," says the factory foreman as the last worker shuffles away. "Where's old Pete?" You shrug. "Don't know any Pete, just started this week." The foreman grunts. Figured. Pete had been delivering here 3 years, didn't show up Monday, probably dead. Baker's lung finally got him. He says this casually, like commenting on the weather. "You don't look strong enough to last half as long." With your empty basket, you begin the long walk back to the bakery. Your legs feel like they're filled with lead, muscles trembling with each step. The city is fully awake now, streets crowded with carts, horses and people. The smoke from 1,000 chimneys blots out the morning sun, casting a perpetual twilight over the industrial districts. Welcome to the workshop of the world, grimy, loud and relentless. By the time you reach the bakehouse, it's nearly 9 in the morning. Your 10-hour shift should be over, but as you descend the steps into the basement bakery, you know better than to expect relief. Sure enough, the foreman meets you at the door, face glistening with sweat, eyes bloodshot from the night's labour. "Good, you're back. We've got a special order. 50 fancy rolls for the tea shop on Chester Street. Get to it." Your heart sinks. No rest. No sleep, just more dough, more heat, more pain. "But I've been up since—" "Did I ask for your bloody life story?" the foreman snaps. 50 rolls, now or find yourself another position. This was the reality for journeyman bakers. Shifts that stretched to 16, 18, even 20 hours when demand was high. Labour laws that protected factory workers simply didn't apply to bakeries. there was always another desperate man willing to take your place if you complained. Back at the bench, you find Harpreet still working, his dark beard now white with flour dust. He looks up briefly as you take your place beside him. "Factory route went all right then?" he asks, hands never stopping as he shapes small pieces of dough into perfect rounds. "Yeah, sold every loaf." "Good. Always worry about new lads on that route. Had a boy last year got robbed at knife point. Lost every penny and had to pay it back. Took him months." As you begin working the dough for rolls, your hands scream in protest. The blisters from the night's work have hardened into painful calluses. Your fingers feel swollen to twice their normal size, but there's a rhythm to the work that becomes almost meditative. Fold, press, turn, repeat. Your mind detaches from your body, floating above the pain. "Master wants to see you," calls the foreman after you've shaped about 20 rolls. "Office, now." The master baker, owner of this establishment, rarely appeared in the bakehouse itself. He occupied a small office above ground where flour dust didn't settle on his fine waistcoat. You wipe your hands on your apron and climb the stairs, wondering what you've done wrong. The office is shockingly different from the hellish bakery below. Clean, relatively cool, with actual daylight filtering through a small window. The master sits behind a desk, a corpulent man with mutton chop whiskers and a watch chain stretched tight across his ample belly. Next to him stands a thin, nervous-looking man clutching a leather case. "This the new one?" asks the master, barely looking at you. "Yes, sir," you reply, awkwardly touching your forelock in the expected gesture of deference. "Good. Listen carefully, boy. Mr. Parsons here is our supplier of quality improvers. You'll be working with him today. Special batch." The master's eyes finally meet yours hard as flint. "And I don't need to tell you that what happens in my bakehouse stays in my bakehouse, understood?" A chill runs down your spine. Despite the perpetual heat of the building, you've heard rumours about quality improvers, the adulterants that less scrupulous bakers added to their bread, but you never expected to be directly involved. "Yes, sir," you mutter, "because what choice do you have?" "Excellent. Mr. Parsons will instruct you. Remember, tight lips mean continued employment." Back in the bakehouse, Mr. Parsons opens his leather case on a corner table, revealing several paper packages and small bottles. The foreman clears everyone else out, sending them on deliveries or to clean the storage room. Soon, it's just you, Parsons, and the omnipresent heat of the ovens. "You ever worked with improvers before, boy?" asks Parsons, his voice unexpectedly refined for such a shabby-looking man. "No, sir." "Well, it's simple enough. Bread's too expensive to make honestly these days. Competition, you understand. Every baker in Birmingham trying to undercut the others." He opens one of the paper packages, revealing a fine white powder. "This here's alum, aluminum potassium sulfate. Makes the bread nice and white, helps it hold more water too. More water means less flour needed per loaf. Less flour means more profit." He says this matter-of-factly, as if discussing the weather rather than the systematic adulteration of the city's food supply. You watch in queasy fascination as he measures out portions with a small brass scale. "This one here," he continues, opening another package, "is chalk. Calcium carbonate. Bulks up the flour, makes it weigh more. Bread's sold by weight. So, isn't that cheating the customers?" you ask, immediately regretting the question. Parsons laughs, a dry sound like rustling paper. "Cheating? Boy, this is business. Everyone does it. Some use bone meal, clay, even ground beans. Alum and chalk are positively gentlemanly by comparison." The casualness with which he discusses food fraud is chilling. But he's not wrong. By the 1870s, bread adulteration was widespread. Economic pressures forced bakers to cut corners, and with no effective food safety laws, the practice flourished in the shadows. "All right," says Parsons, having measured his powders. "We've got a half-sack batch to prepare. Regular flour, but we'll enhance it with these. Makes it go further, look better. The master saves money, customers get bread they can afford, everyone wins." Except, of course, for the people eating chalk and alum with their daily bread. By the 1870s, some doctors were beginning to connect London's epidemic of rickets and digestive ailments with adulterated food, but such concerns rarely reached Birmingham's bakeries. Mixing the adulterants into the flour is unsettlingly easy. The white powders blend seamlessly, indistinguishable from the flour itself. As you knead this special batch, the dough feels slightly different, grittier, less elastic. But once baked, you doubt anyone could tell the difference by sight alone. The real trick, Parsons explains as you work, is getting the ratios right. Too much alum and people taste it. Metallic, too much chalk and the texture's off, but just the right amount. He pinches his fingers together in a chef's kiss. Perfection. Or close enough for Birmingham tastes anyway. The adulterated dough goes into the oven alongside regular loaves. While it bakes, Parsons packs up his case, leaving behind carefully labelled jars of his improvers for future use. "You did well," he says, snapping the case shut. "Not squeamish like some lads. The master will be pleased. You'll go far in this trade, if your lungs hold out, that is." He chuckles at his own dark humour and departs, leaving you alone with your complicity. When the adulterated loaves emerge from the oven, they look surprisingly good, perhaps even whiter and more attractive than the honest bread from earlier. They're set aside for a different delivery route, one serving the poorest neighbourhoods where customers care more about price than quality. "2 pence a loaf for these," says the foreman when he returns. "Half the flour, same weight, lower price. Everybody's happy. Except your conscience, which nags despite your exhaustion. But in the hierarchy of Victorian bakery needs, morality ranks far below survival. With wages of perhaps 20 shillings a week and rent for even the meanest lodgings taking half that, principles were an unaffordable luxury for most journeyman bakers. As noon approaches, a new crisis erupts. Duncan, who had gone on a delivery route after his earlier fainting spell, staggers back into the bakehouse, blood streaming from a gash on his forehead. "Street Arabs," he gasps, collapsing onto a flour sack. "5 of them took the whole basket, 14 loaves for the boarding house on Mill Street." The foreman curses colourfully. "That's coming out of your wages, you useless sack of guts. That's 7 shillings lost." "They had knives," protests Duncan weakly. "What was I supposed to do? Fight back. Die defending the master's property if you have to." The foreman's face has turned an alarming shade of purple. "Instead, you come crawling back with nothing but excuses." This wasn't unusual. Bread theft was common in Victorian cities where hunger drove desperate acts. Delivery boys were frequent targets, especially in poorer districts. Some bakeries hired burlier men for dangerous routes, but most simply docked the wages of unfortunate victims like Duncan. "He needs a doctor," you say, looking at the blood still pulsing from Duncan's wound. The foreman laughs harshly. "Doctor? For a scratch? Back to work, both of you. We've got the afternoon batch to start." So begins the day shift, technically your second shift, though your body has long since stopped distinguishing between work periods. There's a different rhythm now. Instead of the massive batches of standard loaves made overnight, daytime baking focuses on smaller specialty items, rolls, buns, and fancy breads for middle-class tea tables. Despite your fatigue, you find this work slightly less punishing. The dough batches are smaller, the precision required offering a different kind of challenge. You're shaping delicate dinner rolls when the bakehouse door creaks open, admitting a shaft of actual daylight and a small, soot-smudged boy of perhaps 8 years. "Message for the master," he pipes, holding out a grimy piece of paper. The foreman snatches it, reads quickly, and frowns. "They want 30 bath buns by 3 o'clock. New order from the tea room on Corporation Street." Bath buns, sweet fruited breads topped with sugar nibs, were popular afternoon treats for Birmingham's growing middle class. They were also time-consuming to make, requiring ingredients not yet prepared. "We haven't started a sweet dough," protests Harpreet. "There's no currants soaked, no sugar nibs." "Then you'd better get moving," barks the foreman. "And you," he jabs a finger at the messenger boy, "wait for a reply." The boy nods, then lets his curious gaze wander around the bakehouse. His eyes widen at the sight of the massive ovens, the troughs of dough, the exhausted men working in clouds of flour dust. "You want to be a baker when you grow up, lad?" asks Duncan, noticing the boy's fascination. The child shakes his head vehemently. "No, sir. Dad says bakers all die young with rotten lungs. I'm going to be a chimney sweep." A burst of laughter erupts from the tired bakers. The irony of considering chimney sweeping a healthier alternative isn't lost on them. Yet, in some ways, the boy wasn't wrong. Chimney sweeps, for all their hardships, at least worked in the open air part of the time. Bakers spent their lives underground, breathing a toxic mix of flour dust and coal smoke. "Smart lad," wheezes Harpreet, still chuckling as he begins measuring ingredients for the bath buns. "Aim high, quite literally in your case." For the next hour, the bakehouse is a flurry of activity. Sweet dough is mixed, currants are hastily soaked, sugar nibs are crushed for topping. Despite your fatigue, there's something satisfying about creating these more elaborate treats, actual baking rather than the industrial bread production of the night shift. The messenger boy watches it all with wide eyes until the foreman shoos him away with a hastily scrawled note confirming the order. As the door closes behind him, shutting out the brief reminder that a world exists beyond these flour-dusted walls, you realize you've been awake and working for over 14 hours now. The human body isn't designed for such punishment. Your vision occasionally blurs, your hands moving on autopilot through familiar motions. Mistakes become inevitable. A tray of rolls left too long in the oven emerges charred beyond salvation. "That's 6pence off your wages," snaps the foreman. "Pay attention, damn you!" But attention is a luxury when exhaustion saturates every cell. Victorian bakers operated in a perpetual state of sleep deprivation that modern medicine would classify as torture. The resulting accidents, burns, and injuries were considered simply part of the trade. By mid-afternoon, the bath buns are finished, golden brown, studded with currants and topped with crunchy sugar nibs. They look and smell delicious, a cruel contrast to your own gnawing hunger. You haven't eaten since Duncan slipped you that small loaf hours ago. "You," the foreman points at you, "delivery to Corporation Street. Don't dawdle and don't let anyone rob you, not in that neighbourhood anyway. It's all toffs and shop girls." The prospect of leaving the bakehouse, even briefly, feels like a reprieve. You carefully pack the still warm buns into a clean delivery basket and head up the stairs into the world of the living. Outside, the summer sun is high, beating down on Birmingham's smoke-stained buildings. The contrast between the infernal bakehouse and the ordinary street life is jarring. People go about their business, shop doors stand open, a street vendor sells flowers from a colourful cart. None of them know or care about the underground world that produces their daily bread. Corporation Street is one of Birmingham's better areas, lined with fashionable shops and tea rooms catering to the middle classes. The tea room that ordered the buns has large windows displaying dainty tables where women in elaborate dresses sip from porcelain cups. This is the other face of Victorian England. Not the desperate factory workers who devoured bread to fuel their labour, but the comfortable classes who enjoyed baked goods as pleasant accompaniments to social rituals. The manager who receives your delivery is a thin man with waxed moustaches and the perpetually disappointed expression of someone who considers himself better than his station. "These are late," he sniffs, inspecting the buns. "We specified 3 o'clock. It's nearly past." "Sorry, sir. Extra order. Had to make them fresh." He makes a dismissive noise. "I suppose they'll have to do, though they look rather plain. Jenkins over on New Street does a much finer bath bun, you know, glazed with apricot, very continental." You stand impassively, too tired to defend your work or explain the brutal conditions under which it was produced. The gulf between those who make and those who consume seems unbridgeable. This man, with his clean hands and ironed collar, can never understand what went into the buns he casually criticizes. After receiving payment and no tip despite the special order, you begin the walk back to the bakehouse. Your feet drag on the cobblestones, each step an effort of will. The basket feels 10 times heavier empty than it did full. A church clock strikes 4 as you pass, its sonorous tones reminding you that normal people will soon finish their workday, but not you, not any baker in industrial Birmingham. Your shift, already stretching beyond human endurance, will continue until the night's baking begins again at 11. As you descend the steps back into the underground bakehouse, the familiar wall of heat and flour dust embraces you like a toxic lover. Duncan and Harpreet are still at their stations, faces grey with fatigue, movements mechanical. The foreman prowls between them, sharp-eyed despite his own exhaustion. "Payment?" he demands, hand outstretched. You surrender the coins from the tea room, which disappear instantly into his pocket. You don't ask how much of this will actually reach the master, or whether any portion might find its way to the workers who created the goods. The answer is obvious. "Right," he says, already moving on. "Clear those benches. We've got the evening bread to start. 50 household loaves and 30 workers' loaves." Your heart sinks. No rest. No break, just more dough, more heat, more pain. This is what it meant to be a baker in Victorian England. Not the romantic image of artisanal craft, but an endless grind that consumed bodies and lives. As you mechanically begin cleaning the workbenches, scraping away dried dough and dusting with fresh flour, Harpreet appears beside you. His normally stoic face shows concern. "You need to rest," he says quietly, glancing toward the foreman who has momentarily stepped out. "You've been going since last night. Take 20 minutes in the storage room. I'll cover for you." This small kindness, the offer to risk his own position to let you rest, nearly breaks you. In a world designed to grind workers down, such moments of humanity were precious lifelines. "The foreman will notice," you protest weakly. Harpreet shakes his head. "Not if I knock over the flour bin accidentally. He'll be too busy screaming at me to count heads." Before you can argue further, he moves with surprising quickness for an exhausted man bumping hard into a sack of flour precariously balanced on the edge of a shelf. It crashes down, splitting open and sending a spectacular cloud of white dust across the bakehouse. The foreman's roar of rage is immediate. "You clumsy ox! That's 15 shillings of flour!" In the chaos that follows, you slip unnoticed into the small storage room where additional supplies are kept. Among sacks of flour and boxes of yeast, you find a relatively clean corner and sink down, your back against the cool stone wall. The relief of simply not standing is indescribable. Your eyelids feel weighted with lead, your limbs distant and disconnected. Sleep ambushes you between one breath and the next, pulling you under like a riptide. Dreams of drowning in flour consume you until rough hands shake you awake. Your 20 minutes have stretched to nearly an hour, and the foreman's face looms over you, mottled with rage. "Sleeping on my time?" he hisses, yanking you upright. "That's a day's wages gone." Your protests die unspoken as he drags you back to the main bakehouse. The evening work is well underway, with Duncan and Harpreet kneading massive batches of dough. They avoid eye contact as the foreman shoves you toward an empty bench. "Since you've had your beauty sleep," he snarls, "you can handle the fancy breads yourself. Tea shop on Colmore Row wants 30 French rolls and a dozen Vienna loaves by morning. Recipes there." He jabs a flour-dusted finger toward a scrap of paper. "Mess it up and you're finished here." The task is both punishment and test. Fancy breads required skill and precision, usually reserved for more experienced bakers. Assigning them to you, exhausted and junior, is setting you up for failure. Harpreet catches your eye when the foreman turns away, mouthing, "Sorry." His distraction hadn't worked as planned. Instead of saving you trouble, he's landed you in deeper water. The recipe for French rolls is deceptively simple: flour, water, salt, yeast, milk, and butter. But the technique demands finesse, gentle handling to develop the gluten without toughening the crumb, precise shaping to create the characteristic split top. Vienna loaves are even trickier, requiring a special preparation called Vienna process that uses beer yeast instead of baker's yeast for a distinctive flavour. Your hands shake as you gather ingredients. The butter, a luxury in most bread recipes, has softened in the bakehouse heat, slipping greasily through your fingers as you measure it. The milk comes from a questionable jug that's been sitting for hours, already taking on a slightly sour smell in the constant warmth. "Don't waste that butter," snaps the foreman, watching your every move. "Costs more than you do." He wasn't exaggerating. In the 1870s, butter was an expensive commodity, particularly in urban areas. Using it in bread meant targeting wealthier customers who could pay premium prices. The fancy bread market was where bakeries made their real profits, charging 3 or 4 times what they could for standard loaves. You mix the enriched dough carefully, aware of the foreman's scrutiny. The addition of butter and milk transforms both the texture and the workability. It's softer, silkier under your hands, but also stickier and more prone to tearing. Every fold and turn requires a lighter touch than the brutal kneading of standard dough. As you work, a young boy enters the bakehouse, no older than 12, but with the weathered face of someone much older. His clothes are ragged, his thin arms mottled with burns and scars. "New apprentice," grunts the foreman by way of introduction. "Show him what to do, Duncan." Victorian bakeries operated on a strict hierarchy. At the bottom were apprentices, usually boys from poor families bound by contract to serve for years in exchange for learning the trade. Their conditions were often worse than adult workers, their treatment harsher. Duncan gestures the boy over, showing him how to stack wood for the oven. The child moves with the wary caution of someone used to blows, flinching when Duncan raises a hand to point. "What's your name, lad?" asks Harpreet kindly. "Tommy, sir." His voice is barely audible over the bakehouse noise. "Not sir, just Harpreet. We're all covered in the same flour here." You watch this interaction while shaping your French rolls, forming the dough into small ovals before making the distinctive central split with a floured finger. There's something heartbreaking about seeing a child enter this punishing trade, knowing what lies ahead for him: the burning lungs, the exhausted muscles, the life expectancy shortened with every sack of flour heaved. But apprenticeship was how the system perpetuated itself. Every master baker had once been an apprentice. Every journeyman had suffered through those early years. The shared misery created a bond, a fraternity of flour and fire that sustained men through unbearable conditions. Tommy is immediately put to work hauling coal for the ovens, his small frame struggling with weights that would challenge an adult. When he stumbles, spilling precious fuel, the foreman cuffs him hard across the ear. "Clumsy brat, pick up every piece." The boy doesn't cry, a telling sign that such treatment isn't new to him. Instead, he silently gathers the scattered coal, face impassive. By tomorrow, his hands will be blistered and raw. By next week, they'll have calluses to match the older bakers. By next year, if he survives, his lungs will have begun their slow deterioration. Your fancy dough has risen enough for shaping. The Vienna loaves require special attention, formed into oblong shapes with pointed ends, then slashed with a razor in distinctive patterns before baking. The resulting bread would have a crackling crust and a tender interior, commanding top prices in the tea shops and hotels of Birmingham. As you work, a commotion erupts at the bakehouse entrance. A well-dressed woman appears at the top of the stairs, her face pinched with distaste as she surveys the subterranean workspace. Behind her stands the master baker, his usual pomposity deflated in her presence. "As you can see, Mrs. Harding, we maintain the highest standards," he says, gesturing expansively. "The finest ingredients, skilled craftsmen." The woman, clearly a potential customer of significance, descends 2 steps, then stops, overwhelmed by the heat and flour dust. "You actually prepare food in these conditions?" Her voice drips with genteel horror. "All bakeries operate similarly, madam. The underground location maintains optimal temperature for fermentation." The master is sweating now, and not just from the ovens. A wealthy client's disapproval could be disastrous. Mrs. Harding's gaze sweeps across the grimy walls, the coal-blackened ovens, the exhausted workers, and finally settles on young Tommy, his face streaked with coal dust as he struggles with the oven door. "You employ children in this inferno." "Apprentices, madam. The traditional way of training. The boy is learning a valuable trade." Her lips thin to a bloodless line. "I think not, Mr. Barker. My hotel requires suppliers with more modern sensibilities. Good day." She turns and ascends the stairs, the master following with desperate placations. Her silk skirts disappear through the door, taking with her the promise of a lucrative contract. The master returns alone, face darkened with rage. His gaze falls on Tommy, still struggling with the oven. "You..." he snarls. "Your filthy appearance cost me the Grandview Hotel account. Get out of my sight." Tommy shrinks back, confusion and fear warring on his young face. "But sir, where should I..." "Did I ask for questions?" "Out." The boy looks desperately toward Duncan, who steps forward with uncharacteristic boldness. "Master, the lad's contracted for 3 years. His parents were paid £5 for him. You can't just..." "Another word and you'll join him." The master's face has turned an alarming purple. "This is my bakehouse. I decide who works and who doesn't." Tommy backs toward the stairs, eyes wide with panic. Being dismissed means more than losing a position. For a contracted apprentice, it could mean destitution or even prison for breach of agreement. Many such boys had no homes to return to, their families having essentially sold them to the trade. Harpreet moves subtly, slipping something into the boy's pocket as he passes. Money, perhaps, or food. A small mercy in a merciless situation. Tommy vanishes up the stairs, another casualty of the bakery business. The master storms out after him, leaving a wake of tense silence. The foreman, after ensuring his employer is truly gone, spits on the floor. "Bloody high and mighty customers," he mutters, "want their fancy bread but don't want to know how it's made. What did they expect? A bloody palace?" It was a common hypocrisy of Victorian society, a desire for the products of industrial labour without acknowledgement of the human cost. The same ladies who shuddered at bakehouse conditions happily consumed the bread, cakes and pastries produced there, maintaining the fiction that their food appeared by some clean, magical process. Your Vienna loaves are ready for the oven now, risen to perfect plumpness. As you score the tops with a razor, creating the signature pattern that would identify them as premium products, you realize how different these are from the standard loaves produced for factory workers. These breads, with their butter, milk and meticulous preparation, were destined for the breakfast tables of people who would never know your name, never imagine your working conditions, never connect their morning toast to your night of toil. The fancy bread goes into the oven under the foreman's critical eye. 12 minutes, not a second more, he instructs, and watch the colour, they want golden, not brown. This precision was another aspect of class division in Victorian baking. Working-class bread was functional fuel, but middle and upper-class bread was expected to meet aesthetic standards. The perfect colour, the right crust texture, the precise size and shape. Variations that would be ignored in a factory worker's loaf would render fancy bread unsaleable to wealthier customers. As your Vienna loaves bake, filling the bakehouse with a tantalizing aroma, the door opens again to admit a different kind of visitor. This woman wears no silk, no fashionable bonnet. Her practical dress and sturdy boots mark her as working class, but there's an authority in her bearing that commands attention. "Evening, gents," she says briskly. "I'm Mrs. Parker from the Bakers Association, here about union matters." The foreman steps forward, bristling. The master doesn't allow union talk in his bakehouse. "The master isn't here, is he?" She smiles thinly. "And I'm not leaving until I've had my say." By the 1870s, labour activism was reaching even traditionally isolated trades like baking. The Operative Bakers Association had begun organising workers advocating for better conditions and regulated hours. They faced fierce resistance from bakery owners who saw unions as threats to their control and profit margins. Mrs. Parker sets a stack of pamphlets on a workbench, ignoring the foreman's glower. "Manchester bakers won a 60-hour week last month," she announces. "No more 18-hour shifts, no more sleeping on flour sacks, proper breaks, proper sleeping quarters." The men exchange glances, hope and scepticism mingling in their exhausted faces. The idea of limited hours seems as fantastical as a fairy tale in this underground world of endless labour. "The master would never agree," mutters Duncan. "He'd replace us all first." "That's why you need to stand together," Mrs. Parker replies firmly. "Every bakery, every man, they can't replace all of you. Bread must be made, and they know it." The foreman edges toward the stairs, clearly contemplating fetching the master, but conflicted. He too suffers under the brutal hours, the dangerous conditions. He too has seen friends die young from baker's lung or exhaustion. "Take a pamphlet," urges Mrs. Parker. "Read it when you can. Meeting Sunday at the Bull's Head, 3 o'clock. Bring your fellows." She nods toward the oven. "Your fancy bread's burning, by the way." You lunge for the oven, yanking open the door to rescue the Vienna loaves. They're darker than ideal, but not ruined. A close save. When you turn back, Mrs. Parker is already heading up the stairs, having planted her seeds of discontent in fertile ground. The foreman retrieves the pamphlets, but instead of discarding them as expected, he silently slips one into his pocket before hiding the rest in a flour bin. His small act of rebellion speaks volumes about the changing times. Even those who enforced the system were beginning to question it. Your rescued Vienna loaves are cooling on racks, their burnished crusts crackling as they contract. Despite the slight overbaking, they look impressive, artisanal creations that would fetch good prices in the tea shops and hotels. There's a pride in producing such bread, even amid the exploitation and exhaustion. Not bad, admits the foreman grudgingly, inspecting your work. French rolls next, and be quick about it. We're behind schedule with all these interruptions. The night deepens outside the bakehouse, though you'd never know it in this timeless underground world. Your body has moved beyond ordinary fatigue into a strange, suspended state where exhaustion becomes almost hallucinatory. Your hands shape the French rolls automatically while your mind drifts in and out of awareness. You'll get used to it, says Duncan, noticing your struggle to stay alert. After a few months, you can work in your sleep. Literally, if I last that long, you mutter. You might. Got the right build for it. Not too heavy. It's the big fellows who drop first. Hearts give out. He gestures toward Harpreet. He's been at it 15 years, one of the lucky ones. Harpreet looks up at the mention, his dark eyes sunken in a flower-whitened face. Lucky? My lungs rattle like a broken accordion. Can't walk upstairs without stopping to breathe. Call that lucky? You're alive, replies Duncan simply. Most who started with you aren't. This grim calculation, measuring success by mere survival, was the reality for Victorian bakers. In an industry with such high mortality, reaching 40 was an achievement. Reaching 50 was nearly miraculous, as the French rolls take shape under your tired hands. The baker's door opens once more. This time it's a woman in her 30s, plain-faced and practical, carrying a covered basket. "Evening, gentlemen," she calls cheerfully. "Brought your midnight meal." The atmosphere in the bakehouse transforms instantly. Backs straighten, faces brighten. Even the foreman manages something approaching a smile. "Mrs. Watson," he says with unusual warmth, right on time as always. Mrs. Watson, apparently a familiar and welcome visitor, sets her basket on a clean corner of workbench and begins unpacking a large pot of tea, thick sandwiches wrapped in cloth and slices of pie in a tin. "Beef and onion tonight," she announces, "and plum pie from yesterday's fruit." This, you learn as the men gather eagerly around the food, is a baker's wife. Though not necessarily married to a baker, these women made small businesses of feeding bakehouse workers, preparing hearty meals that they delivered during the night shifts. For a few pence per week, deducted directly from wages, they provided the sustenance that kept men going through punishing hours. The food is simple but nourishing. Thick slices of beef between chunks of bread, well seasoned with mustard and onions. The tea is strong enough to stand a spoon in, sweetened heavily with sugar. For men working 16-hour shifts, such meals were essential fuel. "Tommy's all right," Mrs. Watson says quietly as she pours tea. "I've taken him in for now. My Jim was a baker's boy too before the consumption got him. Know what they go through." This casual mention of her dead son, presumably lost to tuberculosis, a common killer of bakery workers, is delivered without drama. Death was a constant companion in Victorian working-class life, particularly in trades like baking. Children were especially vulnerable, their developing lungs no match for years of flour dust and coal smoke. "The master won't take him back," warns the foreman between bites of sandwich. Mrs. Watson shrugs.